Hello, my name is Stephen Bertolucci, and for my research project, I decided to research the online discourse community of Imgur. Sorry about the sidebar here, over here. I originally had it recorded without this, but apparently Windows does not like to record things in full screen with sound, as I found out the hard way the first time I did this. But anyway, moving along. The reason I decided to research this particular discourse community was it's an interesting community. It's got multiple distinct discourse communities all within it, all interacting with each other. So those people on the front page community, the people on the user submitted community, they're very distinct groups, but they all interact with each other to form one larger discourse community. And I found those interactions very interesting. I'll go back to those categories later on in the presentation to explain them more. It's a good study of online versus offline language usage, and that was one of my driving questions for my research was how exactly online communication differs from offline communication. I found some fairly interesting things there. And it was also a fun topic to research. I mean, it's a fun website I've spent way too much time on as part of this community. Just browsing around when I'm supposed to be working, but who doesn't do that? And it's of course the most important reason for research is it's a great excuse to look at a vast array of cats. I mean, cat photos everywhere. It's just an excellent resource for that. As we all know, that's extremely important. So some background of the site. It was founded in 2009, so not too long ago, by a man named Alan Schaff. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. I'm not entirely sure. Those two A's always screw up the pronunciation, but I think it's Schaff, something like that. Close enough anyway. It's headquartered in San Francisco, which is actually fairly close by where I live when I'm not going to school in Michigan. I live in Napa, which is just a couple hours away. I've actually been to the headquarters of Imgur. I've walked by it. I wanted to go in, but unfortunately the people I was with didn't understand how obviously important it was to go in and wave at random people that work there. I mean, understandably, but we didn't end up going in, so. But I have seen it. Um, the primary modes of communication on this website are images, as the name would suggest. The name actually comes from image, I-M-G, and U-R, as in your images. So it allows users to share images and GIFs with each other, to communicate, to share fun, interesting things, etc. And it's also, as I am well aware of, a great way to procrastinate on things that you have to do. Fortunately, it didn't work on this presentation because procrastinating on Imgur was actually doing research for this presentation, which actually worked out pretty well. Alright, so the structure of Imgur, it's divided into three distinct categories. There are more, but I would argue that there are three main categories. There's user submitted, where everything is initially submitted, all user content. So basically all content on the website except the promoted posts that are submitted by the Imgur staff are submitted to user submitted. They start off with 0 posts and 0 views, and as people view them and like them and upvote them, they move to rising, where that's the transition place from user submitted to the front page. And then the front page is where the most popular posts, the one with the most upvotes and everything, the most liked ones go. Many people only browse the front page. It's the default where when you browse Imgur without an account, by default you're put to the front page. That's where the posts with all the most upvotes go. So many people never see user submitted and rising. And in some ways that's good because there are some eldritch horrors in user submitted. But if you're feeling brave, it can be a fun place to venture. A lot more content there than on the front page. If you're wondering about what the photo is, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. No, Just kidding. I know it's not at all. That photo was from a post that someone made on Imgur explaining all these categories and how they work. I referenced that particular post in my paper. It was pretty long, so I didn't have the chance to put it all in here, but I think that photo nicely sums up all of what Imgur is about. All right, so primarily, as in a lot of online communities, there's communications happen through memes. Um, and before anybody jumps on me for, you know, spending an entire 3 weeks just looking at memes and calling it research, I did do some actual research. It wasn't just looking at memes, although that was definitely a large part of it. But anyway, so here's some examples of some memes you might find on Imgur, just for context for the rest of this. So this one on the right here is a fairly recent one. It's popped up in the last 3 weeks or so. And where people will take this in the same basic format and post it into other things, modify the format, modify the text a lot, and as long as it follows the same basic format, it's pretty instantly recognizable. So that's kind of exploded in the last couple weeks. They're oftentimes pretty funny. I put this in here because it's a pretty recent one. So as an online community like Imgur constantly changes and gets new content and throws out old content, stuff like that. This one here, I think you can see the cursor, is the confession bear. So you post that when you want something, you got something to get off your chest, it's a confession to make. It doesn't usually have that horrifying smile on it. That's a new addition that I really just noticed on there. I did not notice that when I put this on here, but regardless, it usually is not as creepy looking as it is right now. But that's, as I said, when you want to, got something you got to get off your chest. One down here is Terrible Tiger. You post him when you want to say something absolutely terrible. As in this particular one, he thinks he's cuter than the confession bear, and well, that's just obviously incorrect. I mean, nothing's cuter than bears. Bears are pretty majestic creatures. That's a little bit off topic, but it's, when they're not mauling you, they're quite majestic and very cute. Anyway, upper right here is the overly attached girlfriend meme. I think that look says about all there is to say about that. And the bottom right one here is the confession, not the confession, I'm sorry, the success kid meme. You post that when you got something you want to brag about. So this man here ate spaghetti while wearing a white shirt and didn't get any sauce on it, which is a significant achievement, as we all know if we own white shirts and spaghetti. Alright, so my research questions and methods, as I said, I didn't just spend 3 weeks browsing memes, much as I would have liked to. So question, what forms of communication are present in Imgur, and how are these forms of communication different than those of offline communities? So as an online community, Imgur has quite a bit of distinct features from offline communities. So, for example, compression of text is a lot bigger of an issue in online communities than it is in offline, because you can't just keep talking. You have artificially enforced limits like character limits, stuff like that. And there were a number of distinct forms of communication present in Imgur, but not in overwhelmingly large amount, which is one of the other reasons that I chose this as a good research project. So there's comments and posts are the primary forms that I focused on. Posts being what the users make and comments being attached to those posts. Comments are limited to 140 characters, so I thought that it would be a good study of how the compression of language affects such character limited texts. Um, so some of my research methods, I did some research on meme theory, so that doesn't necessarily just apply to internet memes. It's more meme in a broad sense, like a repeated idea. And some analysis of the English language, so that I had something to compare this online community to in an offline sense. And of course, most importantly, you learn by doing, obviously. So I spent an awful lot of time browsing Imager at work. I mean, just in general for research purposes, purely, obviously. Yes. Continuing. My findings. So Imager shares many characteristics with other online communities. In that there's particular phrases that tend to be used. There's a lot of kind of inside jokes, but it also does have many unique features, especially in the fact that it's primarily image-based, whereas many other um, online social media communities like Twitter or Facebook are primarily text-based rather than image-based. So that's led to some interesting forms of communication there. Um, and another thing that I found was that online communication is quite different than offline communication. That going into this, I expected to find that. So, whereas normal person-to-person communication, well, the English language, for example, just in general communication, is primarily definition based. So to use a word, you don't need to know where it came from, you just need to know the definition of that word to use it. A lot of the communication in Imager is reference based, so that's the essence of a meme essentially. To use it properly and to communicate the proper meaning with it, you need to know where it came from because that origin is what gives it meaning. It's not necessarily a definition based form of communication so much as a reference based communication, and that's another thing that I touched on in my paper. I found that pretty interesting. One of the things I was surprised about actually was that the compression of language, especially in comments, does occur. Um, the comments are limited to 140 characters, but it's not to the degree that I initially assumed. And there are a couple interesting strategies that people have used to get around that. So, you can chain comments together, you can add images to your comments was a big one. So, going back to the old saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. People use images a lot to add more meat to their comments in the same amount of space. So that's something that I found interesting. So all in all, I think it was an interesting case study. I spend a lot of time on there anyway, so I thought it might be fun to analyze it, and I think I was right. I found some interesting factoids on there and some interesting other stuff. So yeah, that's my presentation.